As Scott mentioned, Cogstate focus on the measurement of cognition. Predominantly, we sell technology and services to the pharmaceutical industry, who we help in their clinical drug trials. So, over 10 years of scientific and commercial validation leading up to this point, and now Cogstate, after being in business for almost 18 years, is now a respected supplier of cognitive science and technology to pharmaceutical industry. We deliver all that via a custom-built eSource platform. So what that means is we deliver both cognitive tests that are designed by Cogstate, as well as other cognitive tests and other measures, all going into a cloud-based system where we can monitor data that's coming in through the clinical trial. So very much as much a technology company as we are a science company. With that business, that clinical trials business, we've been able to deliver year-on-year sales growth. So for the financial year 18, sales were $36 million, up 22% on the prior year, and revenue of just under $30 million US, which has increased 45% over the 3 years from financial year 16 to financial year 18. So we've had good sales growth over that period of time. Up until now, Cogstate's our profits from that part of the business have been reinvested back into the business. We've invested in both new technology as well as new market exploration, and I'll talk about that. The restructure we announced in August of this year was that we were going to scale back some of the investment we were making in that new market exploration and deliver, focus on deliver shorter-term profits for our shareholders. So that took around $5 million of annualised costs out of our business, or $3.5 million worth of costs out of FY18. So substantial change to our business. We expect over the coming 12, 24 months to be able to continue to deliver sales growth, and through that cost control and those cost changes that we've implemented to deliver greater profitability. So that's a summary of what I'll be going through today. Just to go back a little bit and give you a corporate overview of Cogstate. The company is very tightly held. Our largest shareholders are the Dolby family from San Francisco. So you'll recognise the name Dolby Sound, Dolby Surround Sound. So that family is our investors. So on our board is David Dolby, who is the son of Ray Dolby, who was the founder of Dolby Labs. Ray Dolby died of Alzheimer's disease in 2013, and the Dolby family have become very passionate investors in Alzheimer's disease research and Alzheimer's disease technologies and technology that will enable better identification of Alzheimer's disease.
How did they enter the register?
They bought both on market, and we did a placement to them back in about 2012. So the other large shareholding is the Meyer family. Martin Meyer is our chairman and provided the initial seed capital to the business back in early 2000. Around 44% of the stock is held around the boardroom table and management, and there's some other significant shareholders that are listed there. All of those significant shareholders have acquired that stock through on-market acquisition. So we haven't made a placement to any of those individuals. There's no debt in the business, and so it's a pretty straight balance sheet. Just noted there that both the Meyer and the Dolby families increased their stake in the company through some acquisitions post the release of our June 18 results. Oops. So just getting back to, so what is it that Cogstate do? So Cogstate, as we mentioned before, measurement of cognition. When we talk about cognition, really we're just talking about thinking. So we do that, as I said, predominantly we commercialise that technology and services into the clinical trials market. So we've worked in over 70 indications, over 100 languages. The technology is really well validated, over 400 peer-reviewed publications supporting the validation, the validity of the technology in different indications and different drug classes. We work in a number of countries in global clinical trials. We, as noted on the pie graph there, a lot of our work is in Alzheimer's disease, but equally we work in a number of other different indications. For the year to June 2018, we tracked opportunities in over 50 indications. So we're working consistently in a number of indications. As a general statement, we're seeing an increase in the measurement of cognition in clinical trials. So increasingly regulators are looking to measure cognition as a safety endpoint in specific studies. So studies like oncology trials, for example, we'll see cognition measured as a safety endpoint where you're not worried about so much trying to improve cognition, but you're trying to understand whether the treatment, so a chemotherapy, for example, is making people think a little bit worse. So that's what we call a safety measure, and we're used both in efficacy measures like Alzheimer's disease, but also safety measures. And particularly in paediatric studies, we're seeing a lot of work in those safety, as a safety measure, where regulators are concerned about the long-term impact on the mental development or the brain development of children through various treatments. So generally speaking, we're seeing an increase in the measurement of cognition through clinical trials across a range of indications. But certainly Alzheimer's disease is really important to us. Our customers are large pharmaceutical companies. Our largest customer for the financial year 18 was Eli Lilly, but we work with the likes of, as we note there, we work with 14 of the top 15 pharma companies as ranked by R&D spend. So we work with the likes of Pfizer and Merck, Eli Lilly, Johnson & Johnson, etc. Right? So these sort of household names. So large pharmaceutical companies. So why do they choose Cogstate? They choose us because of our expertise in the measurement of cognition. So particularly in studies where they're worried about where cognition is important as an outcome for the study, like Alzheimer's disease. We have the operational expertise and innovative approaches to help them run efficient clinical trials. Our computerised tests are sensitive measures that have been designed for global clinical trials. And we have a deep understanding of what it is required to manage a complex clinical trial across multiple countries in multiple languages, and to ensure that we, essentially what we're delivering at the end of the day is better data quality.
And how do you sell into them? Is it by person? Is it a platform fee, SaaS fee?
No, so we have a team of business development directors who do that. Largely, our marketing materials tend to be our peer-reviewed publications, so it's a science-driven sale. Business development supported by technical experts, whether they be scientific experts or operational experts. Will support a BD director in talking through an upcoming study or trial that a company is planning to run. Largely speaking, we try and get very early in the design, have those discussions very early in the design stage. We like to have our scientific team involved in scientific consulting around the design of the clinical trial. And where we're successful in that, we see a much greater success in terms of conversion of those opportunities to wins.
And is it priced as per trial participant or?
Yeah, essentially the price varies with the size and complexity of the study. But the license fees are based on a price per participant in the study. And then there's another, a whole range of services that wrap around that. And I'll sort of talk about, the contract basis in a minute. I mentioned at the start of the presentation that our solutions are provided by our Cogstate eSource platform. We have a sort of diagram here that tries to demonstrate that, but largely what we're talking about is some sort of tablet computer that'll run both the Cogstate computerized tests of cognition, so our own in-house designed tests of cognition. We'll also incorporate other tests. So a clinical trial for Alzheimer's disease, for example, will include a number of tests of cognition in that study, and we'll incorporate those onto that same platform technology. That's all managed by a cloud-based data management system that allows us to provide central monitoring of that data collection, ensure the data quality in that clinical trial, and also allows us to provide real-time data reporting from that clinical trial to our customers. So to talk through some of the sales results, if you like, we don't sell our technology as an ongoing license fee. We sell into a particular clinical trial, so we have a separate contract for each clinical trial. The value of those contracts can range from $100,000 for a very small, perhaps a phase 1 or a proof of concept study, up to more than $10 million for a global phase 3 clinical trial. So these are revenues to Cogstate and that revenue would be generated over the course of that clinical trial. So a phase 1 study would be, generally speaking, about 9 months from contract signing to last invoice. A phase 3 study could be up to 5 years from contract signing to last invoice. And generally speaking, that revenue is recognised fairly straight line over the course of that study, but there's certainly more activities and certainly the release of the recognition of license fees are more front-loaded in terms of the signing of the contract. We've been able to grow revenue or grow sales consistently. So the graph there demonstrates at the top right demonstrates the growth in sales from financial year 15 to financial year 18. As I mentioned before, $36 million US of sales contracts executed in financial year 18, which was up 22% for financial year 17. All of that leads to a runoff of revenue from those sales contracts. And again, we've seen good growth in revenue recognition based on those sales contracts. So $29 million US of revenue recognised in financial year 18. You can see that that's grown from just under $20 million of financial year 16, and we're expecting that kind of growth to continue. So as I mentioned at the start, up until now, the profits from that clinical trials business have been reinvested in the business, and that's quite a good, profitable business, that clinical trials business, and we've been able to maintain margins in that part of the business as we've grown those revenues. One of the things we invested in was the production of this diagnostic tool called Cognigram. So Cognigram is taking the same Cogstate technology and selling and productizing it and selling that to general practitioners, so your GPs and also into hospitals, where rather than using it in a research setting, people are trying to determine, is the cognition of this patient changing, right? And how do I treat that? So through financial year 18, we achieved the milestones that we wanted to achieve for that business. That now, for that Cognigram product, that has regulatory clearance in the US, in Europe, in Australia, New Zealand. We're seeking regulatory clearance currently in Japan. And we developed a commercial team to grow that business. The decision we made was that towards the end of the 2018 financial year is, notwithstanding the success that we'd had in terms of those milestones for the Cognigram business, that was still a significant investment that we were going to make in that business going forward that would reduce profitability. So what we decided to do is to change our philosophy from that that approach, which had really been to run the business to a break-even position, and to flip that slightly. And I'll talk about that a bit more. So what was the new information that that factored into the making of that decision? Firstly, there was some relatively high-profile failures of some Alzheimer's disease investigational drugs towards the around June 2018. The failure of some of those drugs had an impact on Cogstate's contracted revenue base. So these were studies that we'd sold into, so they formed part of our contracted revenue base. So we knew that they were going to have an impact on our revenue in financial year 18. But more to the point, it sort of put us as a society further away from a treatment for Alzheimer's disease. So that was an important factor in this. As I said before, despite the fact that we'd made significant progress in terms of the commercialisation plans for Cognigram, we still had a long way to go. We lost just on $2 million in terms of the ramp up of that Cognigram team and the achievement of the regulatory approval. And it was our view that that level of loss was likely to be consistent through financial years 19 and 20. And then the other factor that weighed in our decision was just the investment timeframe and what that meant for Cogstate shareholders. So in the context of the loss of some contracted revenue, notwithstanding the fact that we still see significant growth opportunity in the clinical trials business, certainly that was going to impact our short-term cash flow. We wanted to ensure that Cogstate has sufficient runway, to crystallise the opportunities that are in front of us, both in the clinical trials part of the business, but also the Cognigram part of the business. And we didn't want to go to the market to raise additional capital in doing that. So we came to, and the other factor that sort of played into that was in spending $2 million a year on Cognigram, we were kind of half pregnant in the sense of significant investment for us, but changing behaviour in a GP setting, whether that be in Australia or in the US, takes considerable effort. And the assessment we made was that spending of $2 million a year was probably not sufficient to get us there. And if we were going to be successful with this particular strategy, we probably had to be prepared to spend more than that. And so what we did was the opposite and sort of pulled back on that spend. So the announcement we made in August of 2018 was the removal of significant staff costs from the business. So an annualised amount of $5 million worth of salary and on-costs from the business. Those costs or those people accounted for just on $3.5 million worth of costs in financial year 18. So 30 roles removed from the business in total, 17% of headcount. In respect of Cognigram, what our decision was, not that we were going to move away from trying to commercialise that, but we're going to seek to do that in a different manner. Rather than going direct to GPs and direct to hospitals to try and sell that technology, we're going to seek distribution partners to try and deliver those sales, and that's what we're trying to do currently. What that means in the short term, of course, is it reduces our spend and potentially takes us longer to find the appropriate distribution partner and get the product used in market, but certainly doesn't have the same cost basis associated with it in the short term. So in making those decisions in August, there's obviously some short-term ramifications, so some restructure costs that will be incurred from August through to December of 2018. So the full benefit of those savings will be crystallised in the second half of the 2019 financial year. So to have a look at what we're talking about, what we've done on this slide, slide 11, is to look at our 2018 audited financial statements and reconfigure those, showing the profit from the continuing operations, excluding the investment, the $2 million or $1.9 million investment we made in Cognigram in financial year 18. So as mentioned before, $36 million worth of sales generating $29 million of revenue. As you can see there, the clinical trials, what we call clinical trials EBITDA, or that, the profit from that part of the business, good maintenance of margins in that business, and that has been pretty consistent as our revenue has increased year on year, those sort of margins.
So that $36.1 million of clinical trial sales contracts, how much is recognised in that 18 year?
Generally speaking, it's around 40 to 45% of, what you sign in a year will be recognised in that same year. It does vary depending on when you sign them. Obviously, something you sign in July, you recognise a lot more, you have a lot more runway to recognise revenue from that contract than something you sign in June. But as an average statement.
Yep. So how should you think about 19? Revenue was up 10% in 18, but in the same period you had clinical trial sales contracts up 22%. I mean, with that, is it a like for like, as in 19 should be sort of 22% up, or correlate?
Yeah, so it should correlate. So your sales are certainly your leading indicator. Your revenue is a sort of a lagging indicator. So as a general statement, that's 100% true. The only caveat to that was the cancellations we received in June of 18, which sort of brought us back a bit in terms of our revenue growth expectations for financial year 19. Okay. Right, and that factored into our decision making. But so then, if you look at adjusted EBITDA, and in adjusted EBITDA, what we've excluded depreciation, amortisation, but we've also just backed out of that share-based payments and non-cash expense, so the expensing of our employee options. If you look at that adjusted EBITDA, you see that $3.5 million from continuing operations, up from $1.8 million the previous year. So good growth in that profitability, and starting to see that financial leverage that we want to be able to show through the P&L. And the sort of $1.9 million investment in Cognigram is separated there, getting down to our the net profit, the reported net profit of just over $100,000. So going forward, that's the model that we're looking to produce. As I said, the clinical trials business will seek to continue to grow those sales and grow those revenues, maintain those margins, increase the profitability from that part of the business. Everything else should remain relatively constant, but for the Cognigram expense, which will decrease, will be largely zero through January through June 2019. There'll be some costs there in terms of restructure costs in the first half of the financial year. So to guidance for financial year 19, notwithstanding those cancellations we talked about in June, our starting point at the start of the financial year 19 was pretty consistent with where we started financial year 18. So we start on sort of par with the previous year. Our sales prospects are good, and we expect to continue to grow sales from 18 to 19 year, which should lead to a growth in revenue through that period of time. But even at flat sales, with the cost changes we've put in place, the business will be profitable. So specific guidance around that restructure, approximately $2 million worth of non-recurring costs incurred in the first half of the 19 year. So for the first half, we're expecting to record a loss overall for the year, inclusive of those non-recurring costs. We expect the second half to be profitable, and we expect the full year to be profitable, notwithstanding those non-recurring costs that were incurred in the first half.